Our Media Madness segment tonight, new developments in the shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. In the aftermath of the shooting, reports surfaced online claiming the Broward County Sheriff's Office ordered their deputies not to arrest juvenile criminals, students, in order to keep the county's crime statistics artificially low enough to qualify for federal grants under the Obama administration. The reports raised the question about whether Nicholas Cruz, with his history of erratic, violent behavior, the threats he made against his classmates, the violence he perpetrated against his mother, the so-called incident with the teenager the school resource officer refused to discuss with state social services, plus the eventual expulsion of Cruz from Stoneman Douglas High School, if Cruz was one of the students whose crimes were never reported to keep these crime statistics appearing to be low. Originally, many journalists wrote off these claims as being unsubstantiated. But our next guest says there might be some truth and substance to these reports. With me now, contributor to RedState.com, Sarah Rumpf. Sarah, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, Sarah, you did good journalistic work. You looked into this, you dived into the facts, and if there is substantiation to these claims, first of all, talk to me about the idea of these diversionary programs, because we do know that the Miami-Dade district in Florida does have these programs. The report said Broward County followed. What is it exactly?
Well, the general concept actually does have good foundation in criminal justice reform. There's a lot of data that shows that for the low-level offenses, for the first-time offenders, the nonviolent offenders, when you give them an option to say, you need to do some community service, here's a probationary program to follow, and now you can avoid a criminal record. This has been very successful. The concern over past years was what they call the school-to-prison pipeline, where kids were getting arrested for things that aren't crimes unless you're underage. Truancy, alcohol possession, smoking, stuff like that. And kids would get in trouble in school, get arrested. Now they have a criminal record. They're out of class for an extended period of time, and then their whole life is off track. So the initial idea does have merit to it, but if you go too far in the extreme, then you can end up with some really disastrous consequences, and I believe that's what we're seeing here. Now, I don't have direct evidence that that Broward Sheriff Israel has ordered anyone to not be arrested or anything like that, but what we do have is he's elected in 2012. He takes office in 2013. That year, the Broward Sheriff's Office, the Broward County School District, and several other stakeholders like the prosecutors and public defender's office all enter into an agreement about school discipline. And when I looked it up and I read through the whole document, it veered off what, in my opinion, is the standard accepted practice for these diversionary programs. It was the language said was trying to avoid arrest even for crimes. And for things that are low-level misdemeanor offenses, I mean, people aren't overly upset if somebody's not going to jail for a minor bit of vandalism, but repeated conduct, or more importantly, acts of violence, things that are felonies, threats. These are the things that people are worried about. And by their own document, the policy was to not even require arrest, even if it was a felony or serious threat against a school. And that caused me a lot of concern. So I went and I looked up the actual crime statistics for Broward County for the relevant years. The statistics come from the FBI and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And when you look over the years, there's some variation up and down for different types of crime. But what is very noticeable is that the number of juvenile arrests goes way down. It drops by somewhere between 40 and 50% in the period from when Sheriff Israel took office to 2017, the most recent year or 2016 or 2017, the most recent year we have. That is a very significant drop, and that means that if the number of crimes being reported is staying the same, but the number of juvenile arrests is going down, that means some of these crimes are just not having anyone arrested for them. And that gives me a lot of concern.
Right, and so the problem here, the allegations that have been made, and I think you broke this down beautifully, that the diversionary programs in and of themselves aren't necessarily a bad thing if it's a very minor crime or a crime that's only a crime when you're a minor, something that gives an alternative to prison or to jail to minors that just made a bad decision but didn't, harm someone or cost someone their liberty here. The issue would be if the county, the Broward County Sheriff's Department or the school, I guess, if they escalated this, if in an effort to have a continuation of a lowering crime rate, that trajectory that goes down, if they ignored a step more serious crime and then a step more serious crime, and then the year after that, more serious crimes until they were ignoring, like you said, felonies. Given the data that you're just talking about, is that something that you think looks likely given what was reported versus what was committed?
Well, when you go from over 6,000 juvenile arrests in a county to just over 3,000 in a few short years, you end up with that's thousands and thousands, of arrests that are not happening, and that's not all from just a diversionary issue. So the other concern that I have is that we know for a fact now that there were, I believe, 49 calls made about Nicholas Cruz. We know for a fact that he made multiple threats, online threats on multiple platforms. There were multiple witnesses, multiple people who called in complaints. Florida law specifically says that making a threat to harm or kill another person is a crime. There's a specific crime designated for cyber stalking. Any of these things, if they had been pursued, the Miami Herald had a great write-up about this. If they'd been pursued, that would have meant that he would have had to turn over possession of his guns. It would have put him on a list to prohibit him from legally buying any more. And this is where my concern is. When you see such a sudden radical drop in the number of juvenile arrests, you see a written policy that does not require arrest even for felonies and serious threats to the school. And then you see this record of Nicholas Cruz making these actual violent threats, being very disruptive. There's stories of him kicking the classroom doors and making very specific, very violent threats to his classmates. That makes me worry. How many other Nicholas Cruzes
what happened to those reports? If it was buried by the school resource officer, if it was buried by the school district, if it was buried by law enforcement, how that slipped through the cracks. I mean, I think we owe it to not only the children in Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, but children everywhere to look into how that slipped through the cracks. Because if something like that with all those red flags can slip through the cracks there, we need to make sure that it's not going to happen again. Sarah, I appreciate your due diligence here. Good work looking into this. It's very interesting. We'll have to keep an eye on this story for sure. Thanks for being here.